What are the woodworking tricks that would have saved me 20 years of ruined lumber if somebody had just told me first? There are about 11 of them, and every one is something I learned the slow, expensive way, board by board, when the whole thing could have fit on an index card. I have run a garage shop for more than 25 years. I have a wall of clamps that is still not enough, a lunchbox planer, a table saw, and a burn pile that could tell you stories. None of these 11 tricks costs real money. Not one needs a tool you do not already own or cannot buy for a few dollars. What they cost me was time, because I had to fail into every single one of them. Stay with me to the end, because the last one on this list is the single change that fixed more of my joints than every tool I ever bought put together, and it is the one nobody thinks matters. And somewhere in the middle is the one that will make you look at every project in your house differently, once you understand what it really does. Start with the one that sounds too small to matter, and changes everything downstream. Sharpen your tools before every session, not when they finally stop cutting. Almost everybody sharpens a chisel or a plane iron only when it has quit working entirely, which means you spend most of your shop time using a tool that is already halfway dull. A dull edge does 3 bad things at once. It makes you push harder, and the second you force a cut, the tool skates and dives and you have lost your line. It crushes the wood fibers instead of slicing them, so you get a fuzzy, torn surface instead of a clean one. And it is more dangerous, because a tool that needs force is a tool that slips toward your hand. A sharp edge does the work for you. You are not bad at chisel work. Your chisel is dull, and you have been calling that being bad. Give it a few passes on a stone at the start of every session, and you will not believe it is the same tool. It does not take a fancy setup. A combination waterstone, 1,000 grit on one side to set the edge, and 6,000 on the other to polish it, runs about $40, and a strip of leather with a little polishing compound, called a strop, finishes the edge to a mirror. The one step almost everybody skips is flattening the back of the blade. The flat back is half the cutting edge, and if it is not dead flat and polished, the tool will not get sharp no matter what you do to the bevel. Flatten it once, really flatten it, and half your sharpening trouble is gone for the life of the tool. If you saw the sharpening video, this is the whole idea in one line. A sharp edge does the work, and a dull one makes you force it. That was the first one, and it costs nothing but 5 minutes. The second is about the wood itself, and it saves you hours of sanding you should never have had to do. Learn to read the grain before you cut or plane. Grain direction just means which way the wood fibers run and lean, like the nap on a piece of suede or the scales on a fish. Run your hand or a plane one way and it is smooth. Go the other way and it snags and tears. Planing or paring downhill, with the grain leaning away from your cut, slices the fibers clean. Going against it lifts and splinters them out in chunks, and that is tear out, the ragged mess you get when the blade rips fibers instead of shearing them. Reading the grain first, before the tool ever touches the wood, prevents most tear out before it can happen. You have stood there sanding a torn patch for 20 minutes trying to make it disappear. That patch was decided the moment you cut against the grain, and no amount of sandpaper fully undoes it. On tame, straight-grained wood like poplar or soft maple, you can get away with a lot. On figured wood, curly maple, or anything with the grain swirling and reversing, the grain changes direction within a single board, so you read it in sections and you slow down. I blew tear out across a whole curly maple rail once, because I planed the entire length in one direction without reading that the grain reversed halfway. A whole rail, torn, because I did not look first. When the grain fights you no matter which way you go, that is your sign to switch from a plane to a card scraper or to sand it, but you will not know that until you have read the board. Number 3 you already suspect is true, and you skip it anyway, same as I did for years. Practice a new cut on scrap before you make it on your project wood. Everybody nods at this, and nobody does it, because you are excited, and the good wood is right there. But every new cut, a first dovetail, a first angled tenon, a first cut on an unfamiliar saw, is an error waiting to happen, and the difference between making that error on a scrap of pine and making it on your $40 piece of walnut is the whole ball game. Let me put the cost on it, because it stacks up quiet. Ruin a hardwood board every few projects. Call it $40, 3 or 4 times a year. for 20 years. That is thousands of dollars of walnut and cherry and oak in the burn pile, all to skip a 2-minute test cut on wood that was free. Keep a bin of cutoffs right by the saw for exactly this. Set the cut you are about to make. Run it on a scrap of the same thickness first. Check the fit against the real part, and only then touch your project wood. 2 minutes of scrap saves you an afternoon of starting over on wood you cannot replace. Which brings up the fourth one, and this is where I have to correct a piece of advice you will hear everywhere, because a woodworker in the comments will correct it if I do not. People say let your glue cure a full 24 hours before you do anything. The 24-hour number is not wrong, but it is misunderstood. Modern yellow glue, the PVA in a Titebond bottle, reaches most of its strength in about 30 minutes to an hour, and you can safely take the clamps off after roughly 1 to 2 hours on most joints. The full 24 hours is about reaching complete cure before you put the joint under real stress, not about clamp time. What actually matters more than the clock is the clamp itself. A properly clamped yellow glue joint on flat mating surfaces ends up stronger than the wood around it. The wood fails before the glue line does, so if a joint breaks at the glue, it was never a glue problem. It was starved, or unclamped, or the surfaces were not flat and touching. Do not white-knuckle a full day of clamp time. Clamp it right, leave it an hour or two, and let it cure before you stress it. Titebond publishes this on their own spec sheets, an open time of about 5 minutes to get your parts together, and a clamp time in the range of 30 minutes to an hour for most jobs. And the clamping is where people go wrong in the other direction too. You do not need to crush the joint. On flat, well-fit surfaces, snug clamps every 6 inches or so, about a handspan apart, until a thin, even bead of glue squeezes out the whole length, is exactly right. If you are cranking the clamps as hard as you can to close a gap, the joint was not flat to begin with, and you are building in a starved, stressed joint that will fail later. Even squeeze out along the whole seam is the tell that you had good contact and even pressure. Gaps in the squeeze out mean gaps in the joint, and yellow glue does not fill gaps, it bonds surfaces that are touching. Sit with that for a second, because it reorganizes how you think about glue. The glue almost never fails. The prep before the glue fails, and then people blame the bottle. Number 5 is the one that quietly wrecks projects before you ever cut a joint, and it took me the longest to respect. Measure everything from the same reference end. Every time you move your tape to a new starting point, you introduce a tiny error, and 2 tape measures do not even agree with each other. They can differ by a 1/16 of an inch, about the thickness of a stacked nickel or two. Measure one part off one end, and the mating part off the other end, and you built a mismatch in before you cut. Pick one end of the board, mark it, and measure every part of the project from that same reference. Better yet, use a story stick, which is just a scrap where you mark your real measurements once and transfer them everywhere instead of reading numbers off a tape over and over. The number on the tape is where the error hides. Mark it once, transfer it, and the parts actually match. And whatever tape you start a project with, finish it with the same tape, because switching tapes halfway through reintroduces the exact error you were trying to avoid. That covers measuring, but a perfect measurement off a crooked edge is still crooked, which brings me to number 6. Square is everything. If your first board, your reference face and edge, is not truly flat and square, everything you build on top of it leans, and no joint later in the project will save it. Square just means 2 surfaces meet at a true 90 degrees, and out of square means they lean off it, even by a hair. A square out by just a 32nd of an inch over its length, about the thickness of 2 stacked business cards, throws every single cut you take off it. Here is a 1-minute test that will tell you the truth. Take a board, run a knife or pencil line across it using your square, then flip the square over and line it up against that same edge from the other side. If your line and the square still match perfectly, your square is true. If they splay apart, your square is off, and it has been throwing every project you own. I checked a cheap combination square I had trusted for 15 years this way, and found it was out. Not by much. By exactly enough to explain a decade of joints that did not close. The square itself is worth spending a little on, because a cheap one that is out of true costs you every project. A Starrett combination square runs around $60, and it will be dead on, but even a woodpecker's or a decent $20 square is fine, as long as you test it the way I just described and confirm it is true. And once you are assembling a box or a frame, there is a second square check that costs nothing. Measure corner to corner, both diagonals. If the two diagonals are equal, the assembly is square. If one is longer, it is racked into a parallelogram, and you fix it before the glue sets by clamping across the long diagonal. That one measurement has saved more of my glue-ups than any jig. Number 7 is a small habit that separates people who fight their work from people whose parts drop together. When something does not fit, do not force it. Use a shim or a wedge to adjust. The instinct when a joint is tight or an angle is a hair off is to push harder, pound it, muscle it into place. That crushes fibers, splits stock, and knocks the rest of the assembly out of line. A thin wedge, even a slip of paper or a playing card, tucked in to shift an angle or take up a gap, adjusts things gently and holds them where you want while the glue sets. Forcing wood is how you turn one problem into 3. A pair of matched wedges, 2 thin tapers you slide against each other, will lift or level a part by a precise amount and lock it there, which is exactly how you level a cabinet on a floor that is never truly flat. Tap them together to raise, tap them apart to lower. I built a cabinet once where I forced a racked face frame square with a clamp instead of finding out why it was racked. It fought me the whole time, and it still sits a hair out of true in my own kitchen, reminding me. We are past the halfway mark. Those first 7 are the build. The last 4 are about making it look like you knew what you were doing, and this is where a lot of good joinery gets ruined at the finish line. Number 8. When you sand, always go with the grain, never in circles. Cross-grain scratches and little swirl marks from a random circular motion are nearly invisible on bare, dry wood. You sand, it looks smooth, you are happy. Then you wipe on a finish, and every one of those scratches drinks up the finish darker than the wood around it, and lights up like a road map. The finish did not create the scratches. It revealed the ones that were already there, hiding. Sanding straight along the grain leaves scratches that run the same direction as the fibers, so they disappear into the grain instead of crossing it. This is why you cannot finish your way out of bad sanding. Your final look is mostly decided before the finish can ever comes out of the can. I know somebody is thinking about their random orbit sander, the round pad that spins and wobbles at the same time. That tool is fine, and its whole design is to leave a random scratch pattern with no clear direction, so it hides better than straight cross-grain scratches. The trap is going too fast through the grits with it, and leaving swirl marks, little pigtails, that you only see after the finish goes on. Let the sander's weight do the work. Do not lean on it, and do a final pass by hand with the grain at your last grit. My wife once asked why I was sanding a tabletop by hand after the machine had already done it. I told her the machine gets it close and the hand gets it right. She has heard me say a version of that about half my tools. 9 goes right along with that. Do not skip grits when you sand. Sandpaper grit is just how coarse it is. Low numbers like 80 are rough, high numbers like 220 are fine. Each grit is only there to erase the scratches left by the grit before it. Jump straight from 80 to 180, and the 180 paper cannot fully remove the deep 80 grit scratches. It just polishes around them until you cannot see them dry. Then the stain hits, pools in those deep scratches, and lights every one of them up. Go in steps, 80 to 120, to 180, to 220, and each one cleans up the last. It feels slower. It is faster than stripping a blotchy finish off and starting over, which I have done more than once and do not recommend. 10 is the finish itself, and it is the one people rush the hardest. Apply your finish in thin coats, never one thick coat. A thick coat of poly or varnish cannot cure evenly. The surface skins over, while the stuff underneath is still wet, and you get bubbles, runs, wrinkles, and a soft finish that stays tacky for days. 3 thin coats, with a light scuff sanding between them using a fine paper around 320 grit, build a finish that is harder, clearer, and dead smooth. Read the can, because the manufacturer tested this, and their recoat times on the label are best practices, not suggestions. In a humid Gulf Coast summer, a finish takes far longer to dry between coats than it does in a dry heated shop in a northern winter. So let your conditions set the pace, not your impatience. If thick coats are your weakness, and they were mine, Switch to a wipe-on finish. A wipe-on poly, which is just regular polyurethane thinned down, or a can of Watco Danish oil at about $12, almost forces you into thin coats because you are wiping it on with a rag instead of brushing it thick. You physically cannot lay it on heavy. It is slower per coat and more forgiving of everything. And for a beginner, it is the difference between a finish you are proud of and one you sand back off in frustration. I ruined a beautiful cherry tabletop early on by flooding it with brushed poly to save time, watched it wrinkle and stay tacky for a week, and stripped the whole thing. That was the day I switched to wiping finishes on. Before the last one, a word on where a couple of these bend, because I want to be straight with you. Reading grain, and going with the grain when you sand, assumes solid wood. On plywood veneer, or MDF, which is just wood dust pressed with glue, there is no single grain direction to fight, so those rules loosen. And the acclamation point I am about to make is for solid wood. Sheet goods like plywood and MDF barely move with humidity at all, so a lot of the wood movement worry does not apply to them the way it does to a solid oak board. Which brings me to the last two, and they are really one idea, the one I promised would change how you see every project. Number 11. Let your wood acclimate to your shop before you build with it. Wood is not a stable material you cut once and forget. It swells and shrinks as it gains and loses moisture with the seasons, and it keeps doing that forever, not just while it dries. The Forest Products Laboratory, the Federal Wood Research Lab, has documented this movement for decades, and the short version is that wood never stops responding to the humidity around it. Wood you bring home from a store, or in off a cold truck, or from a rack in an unheated barn, is carrying a different moisture level than the air in your shop. Build with it right away, and it keeps moving after it is assembled. And that is when the tabletop cracks and the drawer that fit in the shop sticks by August. Let boards sit in your shop for 2 or 3 days, or longer for thick stock, so they settle to your shop's own humidity first. Indoor furniture settles to somewhere around 6 to 9% moisture. A moisture meter from General Tools runs about $30 and takes the guessing out of it, and if a board reads much above 12%, it is not ready. A 12-inch wide board, about the length of a sheet of paper, can move close to a 1/4 inch across its width between a humid summer and a dry winter, which is the gap of 2 stacked quarters. That is not a small number. That is the crack in your tabletop. Now the one I held for the end, because it is the cheapest change on this whole list, and it fixed more of my joinery than anything else. Mark with a knife, not a pencil. A pencil line has real width, and it sits on top of the wood. So every time you cut to it, you are guessing whether to cut on the near side, the far side, or split it, and you guess a little differently every time. A knife line is different in kind. The knife slices a tiny groove into the surface, maybe 1/100th of an inch deep, about the depth of a fingernail scratch, with one clean vertical wall. When you drop your chisel into that groove, the flat back of the blade registers against the wall and stops exactly there. It cannot wander. The line is not a mark showing you where to cut. The line is the first cut, already made. Japanese carpenters have worked this way for centuries, and the day I switched, my joints started closing tight for the first time in 20 years. A marking knife is about $15, or you can grind one from an old file for nothing. Pair it with a marking gauge, a little tool that drags a wheel, or pin a set distance from an edge, about $30, and you can knife in your tenon cheeks and dado walls parallel to an edge without even holding a square. For rough layout, breaking a board to rough length, a pencil is still fine and I still use one. But anywhere the cut has to be exact, a tenon shoulder, a dovetail, a dado wall, the knife comes out. That 32nd of an inch a pencil costs you is the difference between a joint that closes and one you fill. None of these 11 cost more than a few dollars, and most cost nothing but a change in the order you do things. That is the part that stung when I finally learned them. It was never talent, and it was never the tools. It was doing things in the wrong order and forcing what should have been laid out. Pick one this weekend. If you only take one, take the knife line, because it will tighten your very next joint before you have worked out the rest. Next time I want to cut a dovetail start to finish off a knife line, so you can watch the joint fall together instead of getting forced together. Go sharpen something and go make some sawdust.